slowly, because I have understood that many of you speak English, but not so usefully, so it's better that I do it slowly. Yes. So, okay. Thank you. He mentioned that I have been writing a book on psychopathy. This book is translated to English, Psychopaths Among Us. And very wisely, I forgot to bring them. They are all there waiting for me at the desk at home. So, but if some of you are interested, I have a website on my name. So if you just go on the Brudevold.no for Norway, you'll find everything, you mail me, and I fix it for you. And there you also see a book that I have written on stress, where I also take up what is equality between the sexes doing with our society, our children. How is it that we are telling both men and women to be equal, and more than equal with raising our children? And then I refer a lot to Annika. And this is also translated into English, and you can see it on my website. So I forgot that too. So I start with my theme, my primary theme for this lecture. So, what is psychopathy? That's the question first. Psychopathy is the most dangerous we have to deal with. Why? Because the basic psychological structure of the psychopaths is mean, bad. It consists of two core criteria: grandiosity and lack of empathy. That means that psychopaths see themselves as entitled to be seen as the greatest of all, with the right to whatever they want, with no regard to whatever consequences that may bring to others. These two criteria is the permanent in their personality. It's fast, it's there. And out of these two basic criteria, we get the psychopathic traits. And that is to be false, emotionally poor and simple, superficial, egoistic, perfidious, betrug, manipulative and lying, to mention the most common. All psychopaths have these traits, but as we shall see later, they can easily be disguised. Almost every person, not everyone, have these traits, but not the two basic. And I'm often asked, I have this or that psychopathic traits. Am I a psychopath? No, you are not, is my answer. And I ask back, do you know why? Because you have empathy also. Sometimes the empathy is not so clear in some of us, but we have capability. That is the difference. Not if we have the traits also. The lack of empathy is what makes psychopathy different from all other disorders and illnesses. All other disorders and illnesses contain the ability of empathy. It can be in distorted way, it can be in different, can be seen differently, but they have the capability. Many of us think that we easily can discover who is a psychopath. They are so terrible, therefore easy to discover. You know that one? That's what we think. But that is not so. Psychopathy has many different ways in which it can appear and hide. Psychopaths can work in all different occupations and be educated in every profession, and is to be found as often in women as in men. They can seem and pretend kind, good, modest, generous, charming, and nice. Everything that is looked upon to be worthy and valuable. But their true nature behind this is bad, mean, selfish, egoistic, and emotionally and mentally defective in a way. That is shown in their behavior, like ruthlessness, unscrupulousness, crime, violence, rape, psychic terror, pester, and exploitation. When we look at how psychopaths are, we understand that the people they interact with can be seriously, physically and psychologically hurt and destroyed. The psychopath's skills to make others think and feel that they are incompetent, psychic, dysfunctional, weak, and wrong, not the least, often leads to many personal tragedies. The tragedies often get worse because family, friends, colleagues, and health personnel very often get convinced and seduced by the psychopath's charm, gift of speech, and twisting of reality. Then they often take the side of the psychopath and work against the victims. That can have terrible consequences for the victims. I have many stories that I could tell you about that. When we look at how the psychological structure of the psychopaths is, how the psychopaths function and behave, it becomes obvious that they can be dangerous. Not only to the people that they interact with in their daily life, but also through their work and their role in the society. on all levels. They can, for instance, often have positions as leaders in business and politics. And then their power, combined with the conviction of their own right to dictate and to be superior of all rules and laws, lead to the most gruesome behavior in the world. It can lead to the most gruesome behavior. We know. To have a brain, as I soon shall explain, that make the person convinced that he or she is entitled to and in its right to get whatever they mean benefits them and their goal, no matter the consequences of others, as I said, can lead to a disaster. How is it that some of us become such a monster? How is that? Nobody is born a psychopath. And there is no proof of genetic inheritance. A baby cannot be empathic or mean. A baby is. For a baby, the existence is a question of getting care, of getting food, of not being cold, not being warm, not being hungry, but being satisfied. For a baby, the world shall naturally turn around him or her. For the baby is and shall be the center. Then the child approaches 1 year and has become much stronger in his or her will, as many of us know. And has become, the child needs then to be socialized and learn that it is no longer appropriate to get all its wishes met or fulfilled. The child must learn to take regard and have respect of other people, to be considerate and treat others with respect and with regard. To be considerate, all this is dependent of having the ability of empathy. So the ability of empathy must now be developed. So it is not developed before about 1 year, but then the development starts. How? What happens then? Because empathy is not learned by being explained to, that this is the empathy, this is this and that. It is not an intellectual knowledge that you can learn in this way. Empathy is an experience, it's a feeling. So it has been, it is developed through some kind of feelings that happens. How is that? Let's go back to the baby at around 1 year. That is about the time when the part of the brain that is the center of empathy, the ability to feel empathy, the orbitofrontal cortex starts to develop. And as I said, empathy is the ability to feel others' feelings, not to know, because that we can read of the face or the position of the body or with some other clues. We can understand, but that is an intellectual knowledge, as I just said something about. But it is about feeling and experiencing. The orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, is developed in about 6 months. During these 6 months, the primary caretaker's interaction with the child must be of a certain kind. If the development is going to be normal, the primary caretaker must raise the child by putting up boundaries and limits, and learn the child about wrong and right in that way. The frustration the child then experiences is crucial for the development of the OFC, because the frustration creates hormones or shift in the physiology, and that is very important for the development of this part of the brain, the OFC. If the primary caretaker accepts everything the child does limitless, the child will remain in the experience of being the most important person in the world and shall have all its desires fulfilled. Grandiosity. So they remained in that state, but of course more sophisticated, because they develop all the sides. And that is what can be very dangerous. Robert Hare and Paul Babiak have done fMRI tests on prisons that show how lack of empathy is seen by no blood flow in the OFC. I refer to these tests more in my book. The OFC is also the center of the self. And that means that psychopaths have no self. Shocking to many of us. And therefore, they are not capable of self-reflection. That is why it is not possible to do therapy with psychopaths. They cannot change their psychological structure. But there are therapists, family members, or others that think they have managed to change psychopaths or the psychopathy-like person, because we don't really know what we think this must be a psychopath or not, and we think we have been able to change. But what psychopaths are very good at is to change behavior when they can profit of it. It is just a play for the gallery, and they can play very convincing. There are documentations that show that therapy with psychopaths can make them worse. They get more tools to manipulate and exploit with, and they often convince the therapist or other person that it is the partner or other part that is difficult or ill. I guess some of you had this experience. The psychopath cannot feel remorse, anger. Is it that in? Okay. Or bad conscience, because these feelings are parts of the self. Many people waited for Anders Behring Breivik's excuses and regards. They felt it unbelievable that he did not feel bad about what he has done. But he could not. His brain is not developed for that. What he could, like many psychopaths do, because they feel or they know is appropriate, is that they say, excuse me, and everybody are sorry. When the OFC, the orbitofrontal cortex, fails to develop, the child has already become a psychopath. That means that psychopathy starts at about 1.5 years. Then the child develops the form and intensity of the symptoms after how the people and situation around them develop. So how they will show their psychopathy depends on many other things around, but the ground structure is there. What I just have explained to you, what is. The psychopath is extremely good at detecting and taking advantage of anything and everyone that is unaware of how the psychopaths function. To diagnose the psychopathy can be difficult. To do fMRI research when one sees that a child or grown-up has a typical psychopathic behavior can assess the diagnosis. But of course, this is not easily done, and there can be, people say there can be ethical problems with that. But I also would say it could be ethical problems with not doing that. So, what do we have to look at the most? For me, it is so important to detect when we have the psychopath to do. So, to do the fMRI if we can, or if it's possible, I would say do it. Here, Robert here has made a kind of list of psychopathic checklists. But he has now later said that this is not a good one. It doesn't really come to what we want to see. There you can have a high score altogether that shows that you are a psychopath because of all the traits. And you can miss to score on not having the ability to empathy. So that can be very distorted. You need to have a lack of empathy and grandiosity. If you have a lot of the other traits, it can be other things like, for instance, antisocial and things like that. That is not the same thing. There are signs that tell us that psychopathy is growing in Norway. Can our lifestyle and so-called equality between the sexes affect the development of psychopathy in some ways? Yes, it can. In Norway, the equality between sexes has led to that most men and women are working outside the home. The consequences for the children is more and more reported by investigators and scientists to be lack of attachment among many other consequences. Now, as we just have seen, lack of attachment is not the cause of psychopathy. That is lack of appropriate limitations and boundaries. But and lack of attachment. But lack of attachment means unsecure children. And unsecure children become later unsecure parents. Unsecure parents have difficulty in putting up adequate limits and rules for their children. There we have the link. Attachment is developed during the first 2.5 years. Some say during the first 3 years, but at least during the first 2.5 years of a child's life. It is dependent on the primary caretaker's presence, both physically and psychologically, in such a way so that the child feels safe and secure. You know this. To obtain that security, the child and primary caretaker need a certain time together. Therefore, it is not only about quality, as some say, but also about quantity. So, when both parents or caretakers work full time, there is most likely less time with the child. Quite obvious. And attachment can be missed. Lack of attachment also has implications for the brain that cannot be healed later. That is why an insecure child becomes an insecure grown-up and parent. Therapy cannot heal that in the brain, but the client can learn to cope with it, with the insecurity, and possibly react to the child in an adequate way. That's a different story. It can be learned. It can be by other therapy, like behavior therapy, for instance. But it doesn't change what has happened in the brain with a lack of attachment. I guess there are a lot of people here that know much more in the brain than I do with this. And we will hear about later, I guess. So, can we prevent children becoming psychopaths? Yes, we can. But that involves bearing the child's frustration, anger, and crying when the child is stopped getting his or her will. It also involves being clear about, both to the child and to oneself, that the grown-ups have the responsibility and have to be empowered in an understanding way, of course. So to let the children rule and let them have because it's so good for them is not good for them at that age. They must have guidance in a loving way. To bear a child's frustration, anger and cry, one needs to feel secure and safe ourselves. If not, when the child shows these feelings, it will trigger the same feelings in the parent or the primary caretaker. because it was their experiencing of exactly the same feelings of frustration, anger and crying that made the parent insecure, unsafe and afraid in the first place. To witness these feelings in one's own child will then activate the parent's psychological pain. That is difficult to bear for many, and the only way then to end this pain is to make the child happy again, right? Stop the cry and anger and let the child have its will. This is the most common reason to develop psychopathy. But there is another reason why a child can become a psychopath or develop psychopathy. The primary caretaker can be a psychopath. Some psychopaths create a psychopathic personality disorder in their child, as they are grandiose and look upon themselves as best in the world. They see everything that comes from them also as the best in the world. My child. So there is nothing wrong with the child I ever can see then. The child is perfect and allowed to everything and limitlessly admired. So, no guidance and regulation that the child needs to develop orbitofrontal cortex. Most psychopaths do not act in this way towards their child. On the contrary, they act like a typical psychopath and can give their child a very hard time, which can lead to, among other consequences, that the child becomes unsecure. What about kindergarten? Can sending children to kindergarten, where they will be raised with good limits and guidance, prevent the development of psychopathy? No, it cannot. It is always the primary caretaker who has the power of creating the kind of frustration that is necessary to develop the orbitofrontal cortex. The child knows by instinct who they are dependent of the most to get their basic needs met. And that person is the only one that can frustrate the child's brain so it can mature. The same is the case with attachment. If the primary caretaker is not good enough present in the first 2.5 years, a good kindergarten cannot compensate it. So, when it comes to kindergarten, it has no direct impact on the development of psychopathy. So, but the indirect consequence of sending children away to kindergarten too early is as important if it results in lack of attachment and insecurity. So the children can become insecure because of too little contact with the primary caretaker, which we have seen. So, I will end this talk where I started. Psychopathy is the most dangerous we have to deal with. You can never trust a psychopath. They can do everything for their own benefit, and many of us don't want to believe this. Many people don't want to believe that it is possible even after we have got the proofs of evidence. They refuse to accept that psychopathy exists. The diagnosis of psychopathy was even said to be removed from the diagnostic systems but it luckily was not. In Germany, you have just had the case of the beloved football president, Uwe Hoeneß, and his hiding of 1 million euros from taxes, and the East German medical experiment of ignorant patients for science and fame. And we had in the States the Ariel Castro that kept these women hidden for 10 years almost. So, how could they? Because they cannot feel empathy, remorse or conscience. And then they are grandiose, and it's in their brain. So, to prevent and avoid psychopathy, we need to learn what it is. We need to learn how to discover it and how to deprive them from their power. We must be aware and conscious about its existence and how crucial it is that we raise our children with guidance and presence. I see our awareness and consciousness in this issue of psychopathy as the solution to create respect, equality, worth, and dignity. Thank you so much.